The power went out just as I was reheating last night's chili. 1 second the microwave was humming, and the next boom, total silence. I checked the breakers. Nothing. Then I stepped outside and saw the reason why. A bright orange tag slapped across my electric meter. Disconnected due to non-payment contact HOA. I stood there blinking in disbelief, holding a half-warm bowl and wearing socks with holes in them. I'd paid every utility bill.
On time.
Every time. There was only one possible explanation. The HOA. And that meant one person. Nadine Kensington. The HOA president. Middle-aged menace in a pastel tracksuit who treated our neighborhood like her private kingdom. Her lawn was edged like a golf course, and she carried around a clipboard like it was a holy relic. I stormed over to the HOA office, which was basically just a converted shed with a fake potted plant and a Keurig machine nobody used. Nadine was already waiting, like she knew I'd come. Well, Isaac O'Connor, she said, not even pretending to be surprised. I was wondering when you'd show up. You cut my power? I said. Are you out of your mind? Her lips curled. You've had outstanding HOA fees for 3 months. We sent letters. I paid those fees 2 weeks ago. I snapped. I even got the confirmation email. She waved her clipboard. Our records say otherwise. Besides, per Section 14, subsection B of the bylaws, we reserve the right to suspend utilities for delinquent accounts. You're not a utility company, Nadine. You don't own the power lines. She blinked. We have a private agreement with the substation. You signed the bylaws when you bought your house. Now I was furious. That doesn't give you the legal right to disconnect essential services. That's criminal. She raised an eyebrow. Then call the cops, Isaac. See what they say. So I did. The officer who showed up was polite but firm. Sir, this sounds like a civil issue. File a complaint with your city's housing department. I looked Nadine dead in the eye.
No.
This isn't civil. It's criminal tampering. Her face twitched just a bit. And that's when I knew. Something was off. That night, I started digging. I pulled up the HOA's bylaws. I went through my payment history. And then, out of curiosity, I called the electric company. Sir, the guy on the line told me, we don't have any arrangement with your HOA. In fact, it's illegal for a third party to tamper with a residential meter. That was all I needed. I filed a formal criminal complaint the next morning. Utility tampering. Fraud.
Trespassing.
I attached photos of the tag, copies of my receipts, and a statement from the electric company. I wasn't just going to get my power back. I was going to take Nadine and her little HOA cronies down. By the time I arrived at the county records office, the clerk was already tapping her pen like she'd been waiting hours for something interesting to happen. I handed her a printed copy of the HOA bylaws and asked for a look at the original filing documents. She pulled them up on her terminal and squinted at the screen. These were submitted 15 years ago, she said, scrolling. Last amendment was.
Huh.
That's odd. What? I asked, leaning over the counter. She turned the monitor slightly. They filed an amendment 2 years ago stating they had jurisdiction over utility coordination. But that section isn't notarized. And there's no county stamp. So, it's not legally binding? She shrugged. Not if it wasn't processed properly. Could have been inserted after the fact. I'd need to escalate it to the legal review team to say for sure. Please do, I said. And if you can, send me a certified copy of the original file. I'll pay for it now. On the way home, I stopped at the utility company's local office. A manager named Brent met me in the lobby after his receptionist passed along my documentation. We've had issues like this once or twice, Brent said, flipping through the paperwork. But never with this particular HOA. Can you confirm it was someone from their board who requested the shutoff? He nodded. We log every request. This one came through a third-party account set up in the name of Kensington Community Management. That's not even the name on their incorporation papers. So it's a shell account? Could be. We've already flagged it internally. If this was done without the homeowner's permission, it's a serious violation. That's what I'm saying, I replied. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. Brent tapped the folder. We'll cooperate with law enforcement if they pursue it. This isn't just a civil matter anymore. By the time I got home, 2 other neighbors had left notes on my door. One was from a retired welder named Dave, who lived 2 doors down. His note said he'd had a similar shutoff notice, but the HOA claimed it was a meter recalibration. The other was from a single mom named Lena across the street. She said her water was shut off for a day last month due to compliance issues with landscaping violations. That night, I invited both of them over. We sat around my back patio with a flashlight clamped to the umbrella pole, sipping lukewarm soda and comparing stories. They told me if I didn't remove the trampoline from my yard, they'd start charging me daily penalties, Lena said. Next thing I know, my water was gone. Dave nodded. They sent me a letter saying my garage door color violated the aesthetic code. I told them I'd painted it the same shade 20 years ago, long before their color board existed. A week later, power gone. Said it was a grid failure. I pulled out a legal pad and started jotting down dates, names, and every detail they could remember. When we finished, I had a timeline going back 6 months, showing a clear pattern of retaliation disguised as maintenance or compliance enforcement. The next morning, I visited the county sheriff's office. Detective Ramirez listened carefully as I laid out the timeline, handed over the documents, and showed him statements from the electric company and my neighbors. He flipped through the stack slowly. This is more than just overreach. If they used a fake company name to authorize service disconnections, that's fraud. And trespassing, right? I added. They had to physically access the meters. He nodded. That too. Plus coercion, if they threaten penalties to force compliance. Then what's the next step? We'll open a formal investigation. I'll need to interview the other homeowners. If we can prove a pattern, I can get a warrant for their internal records and communication. Within 48 hours, Ramirez and his team had spoken to 5 more residents. All of them had similar stories: fabricated violations, unexplained service interruptions, and threats of escalating fines. The clincher came from Mrs. Alvarez, a retired court clerk whose husband had passed away the previous year. She kept meticulous records, including voice memos of every HOA meeting she attended. In one recording, Nadine's voice could be heard clearly. They don't listen until we cut something off. Believe me, a day without air conditioning and they'll beg to pay whatever we ask. That audio was the nail in the coffin. Ramirez filed for a warrant the next morning. By Friday, the sheriff's department raided the HOA office. I happened to be walking my dog when the cruisers pulled up, 3 of them, lights flashing but no sirens. Nadine stood outside in her lavender windbreaker, arms crossed like the queen of a collapsing empire. An officer read her rights as they handcuffed her on the sidewalk.
She didn't speak.
Just stared at the ground like the world had betrayed her. I wasn't the only one watching. A dozen neighbors had gathered silently along the curb. For the first time since all this started, I saw something I hadn't seen in months: people talking, sharing, connecting. The fallout came fast. The local news picked it up that night. HOA president arrested for utility tampering and fraud. The county prosecutor announced formal charges the next day: 6 counts of unauthorized utility interference, 5 of fraudulent misrepresentation, and 3 of criminal coercion. But that wasn't the end. 2 board members were also charged. Turns out Nadine hadn't been working alone. A treasurer named Dale had been setting up the fake accounts, and the vice president, Miriam, a retired insurance adjuster, had been drafting fake violation letters and backdating them. The judge denied bail for all 3, citing risk of tampering with evidence and potential witness intimidation. I spent the next week helping neighbors prepare statements for the civil case. With criminal charges pending, the county initiated a temporary receivership of the HOA's functions. A court-appointed manager stepped in to handle everything while the investigation continued. And then something truly unexpected happened. Lena, the mom from across the street, started organizing a neighborhood council voluntary, no dues, no enforcement authority. Just a forum for people to talk, support each other, and share resources. "I'm tired of being afraid of my own neighborhood," she told me. "We deserve better." I agreed. By the end of the month, nearly every homeowner had signed a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. With the board members facing felony charges and the bylaws riddled with illegal amendments, the judge approved the dissolution. For the first time in 15 years, our neighborhood was free from their grip. I got my power back. Dave repainted his garage door black and gold just to celebrate. And Lena's trampoline? It stayed, and she added a zip line. But the best part wasn't what we got back. It was what we built. Not a homeowners association. A community. One that didn't need threats or fines to function. One that looked out for each other instead of looking for violations. And all it took was a fake company name, an illegal shutoff, and one very determined guy with a notepad. It was 2 weeks after the arrests when I got the letter. A plain envelope, no return address, slid halfway under my doormat. Inside was a single sheet of paper printed with a list of names and numbers. No explanation. Just page one of what looked like a spreadsheet. I recognized the names immediately. Homeowners on our street, some still living here, some who'd moved out over the last few years. Each row had columns labeled violation, penalty, lien filed, and, most telling, final amount collected. The sums were staggering. One homeowner had supposedly been fined over $6,000 for excessive foliage. Another had a lien placed for $400 in mailbox noncompliance, followed by a foreclosure notice 3 months later. All of it documented, dated, and disturbingly precise. I brought the sheet to Detective Ramirez the same afternoon. He examined it with pursed lips. "Where'd you get this?" "No idea. It was left at my door. No note, no sender. Whoever sent it, they wanted us to see it. This looks like internal accounting. I'll run it by the DA. Could this open up more charges?" He nodded slowly. "If they falsified violations to justify liens and forced sales, that's not just fraud, it's racketeering. We're talking about coordinated property theft." I didn't know it yet, but that single page would unravel an entirely different side of the HOA's corruption. A quiet pattern of targeting vulnerable homeowners, seniors, recent immigrants, people living alone, slapping them with violations they never heard about, then filing liens and quietly acquiring their homes through forced sales. The county began a forensic audit of the HOA's financial records. What they found made the utility tampering look like child's play. Over the course of 6 years, the board had orchestrated the foreclosure of 12 homes. 8 of those properties had been transferred to a company called Clearview Property Holdings, which, after a bit of digging, turned out to be registered under the name of Dale's sister, a real estate broker 2 counties over. The scam was painfully simple. Hit the homeowner with trumped-up violations. Stall or refuse communication. File a lien. Wait for default. Then swoop in and buy the property through a shell company at a fraction of its value. And nobody had noticed because they'd spread it out 1 or 2 houses a year. Quiet enough to avoid raising alarms, especially with a board that controlled all the communication channels. The DA's office filed additional charges against Dale and Miriam: conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, wire fraud, and violation of the state's Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. As for Nadine, she was hit with new charges too: orchestrating the scheme, intimidating witnesses, and knowingly profiting from unlawful property acquisitions. Her pastel world was imploding. Meanwhile, the court-appointed manager, a no-nonsense woman named Carla Whitmore, started combing through every document they'd left behind. She found things even the auditors missed, like emails between the board members discussing target metrics for fine collection, and priority lists of properties that were low resistance. Carla briefed the new neighborhood council on everything she discovered. We met in the community center's back room, folding chairs set in a haphazard circle like a support group for the recently unshackled. "This wasn't mismanagement," Carla said, holding up a stack of files. "This was deliberate. Calculated. They kept 2 sets of records, one for residents, one for themselves. The real books show thousands in unreported income, all funneled into accounts we're still tracking." "How did this go on for so long?" asked Mr. Patel, who had lived here since the development was built. "They controlled the narrative," Carla replied. "They silenced dissent, buried complaints, and fabricated compliance reports. Most HOAs don't have the authority to do what they did. But yours had no oversight, no elections, and no transparency." Lena leaned forward. "So, what happens to the people who lost their homes?" "That's where it gets tricky," Carla said. "Some were sold to third parties. But the ones transferred to Clearview, we're working with the state housing department to recover. It'll take time, but the DA's office is prioritizing restitution." I could see the weight of it hit the room. This wasn't just about a few crooked fines. It was about lives upended, equity stolen, and power abused behind locked doors. The state attorney general got involved next. Their office launched a joint investigation with the county to review all HOAs in the region with similar structures. Turns out, our neighborhood wasn't the only place where lines were being crossed. News crews returned, this time broadcasting live from the very sidewalk where Nadine had once stood issuing citations for cracked driveways. They interviewed former residents who'd moved away, some who'd lost everything and never knew why. One woman, an elderly widow named Jeanette, broke down on camera. She'd lost her home 3 years earlier after being fined over $8,000 for fence height violations she claimed never existed. Her voice trembled as she explained how she'd tried to fight it but kept getting letters saying, "The board's decision is final." It was Carla who found photos in the HOA's archive proving Jeanette's fence had never changed height in 15 years. The AG's office called it a textbook case of systemic abuse of power. They began drafting legislation aimed at increasing transparency and oversight for all HOAs in the state. Meanwhile, back in our neighborhood, things began to look different. The signs came down. The no parking stencils disappeared. People started painting their homes however they wanted. One guy even added a mural of a sunset with a hawk flying across it. No one complained. A group of teenagers set up a lemonade stand at the corner. Under Nadine's rule, they would have been fined for unauthorized commercial activity. Now they were selling out daily. And for the first time in years, the pool was open, free to use, no key fob required, no reservation system, no one taking notes on towel sizes. But maybe the most powerful moment came when Carla handed me a sealed envelope during one of our council meetings. "Judge signed this today," she said. "Thought you'd want to see it first." Inside was the official court order dissolving the HOA permanently. Not temporary management. Not reformation. Total dissolution. The community erupted. Someone brought cupcakes. Mrs. Alvarez brought sparkling cider. Dave set off a single-bottle rocket from his driveway, laughing like a man who'd just beaten the system, and in a way, he had. I didn't ask for any recognition, but people started calling me the guy who broke the board. Lena joked about making lawn signs that said O'Connor for neighborhood president, but I declined. What mattered wasn't the title. It was what we'd reclaimed. Not just power, but dignity. Self-determination. The right to live without being watched, fined, and manipulated by people hiding behind bylaws and clipboards. The DA's office kept me updated through Ramirez. All 3 former board members accepted plea deals, though Nadine held out longest. She eventually folded when presented with evidence of her signature on the phony lien filings. She'll be serving time, not just probation, but actual prison. The restitution fund, seated by the seized assets from Clearview Property Holdings and frozen HOA accounts, is already being distributed. Jeanette, the widow who lost her home, received enough to purchase a new condo near her grandchildren. After everything, I started sleeping better. Not just because the lights stayed on, but because I didn't feel like I had to look over my shoulder anymore. And yet, the thing that stuck with me most wasn't the arrests or the restitution or even the judge's order. It was a moment, a few days after the dust had settled, when I passed by the old HOA office. The shed was locked, the windows shuttered, but someone had taped a handwritten note to the door. It read, "This place used to scare me. Now it's just empty."
Exactly.
The shed that used to be the HOA office was finally hauled away one morning by a flatbed truck, its wheels squealing as it was dragged off like a carcass. I watched from my porch as the work crew bolted a new community bulletin board to the same concrete slab. No locks, no keycard access, just cork, pushpins, and an open invitation for the neighborhood to post whatever they wanted. The first flyer up was for a potluck. I hadn't seen this many kids playing outside in years. Without the constant threat of notices taped to doors or anonymous complaints, the place felt lighter.
People waved.
Doors stayed open longer. Music drifted out from backyards. But underneath the surface, there were still unanswered questions. One of them came to me in the form of a phone call from Carla. "I've got something you need to see. I'm heading to the records vault downtown. Thought you might want to come along." By the time I met her at the municipal building, she was already holding a worn folder with a faded seal on the front. "This," she said as we stepped into the archive room, "was buried under a stack of unindexed filings from nearly a decade ago. It's the original deed transfer for the parkland behind the subdivision." I raised an eyebrow. "The Greenbelt." She nodded. "It was supposed to remain under city jurisdiction, open access. But someone filed a quiet claim transfer to the HOA. The signature on the request? Nadine's predecessor, but the city clerk at the time never verified it. Why would they want to own the Greenbelt?" Carla flipped open the folder. "Because the mineral rights were never split. And 2 years ago, the board quietly signed a lease with a company that's been testing soil samples under the guise of drainage improvement."
Ich sagte her.
"Are you saying they were trying to sell mining rights?" "Not just trying," she said. "They already received an advance just under $60,000 from a company called Grafton Resources. That money was deposited into a private account under the name of Greenview Civic Ventures, which, surprise, was registered to Miriam's husband." The name hit like a punch. "And no one knew?" "Not until now. They masked the deposit as a community improvement loan, then funneled it through a short-term construction project that never broke ground. We brought everything to the State Land Commission the next morning. By noon, the commission had called in the Attorney General's office. The forged land transfer, combined with the concealed mineral lease, meant the board had committed environmental fraud on top of everything else. The commission issued an immediate cease and desist to Grafton Resources, who, once contacted, sent a compliance officer to explain they'd been assured the lease was fully legal. When shown the forged documents, the officer paled. "I assure you," he said, "we'll cooperate fully. We don't want our name tied to this." The case exploded. News outlets picked it up within hours. Headlines shifted from local HOA corruption to environmental fraud, and suddenly our little neighborhood was a focal point in a much larger investigation. The state issued subpoenas for every financial transaction tied to Greenview Civic Ventures. The AG's office confirmed that the $60,000 was just the first of several planned payments, contingent on drilling rights being quietly secured through a zoning reclassification the board had attempted to slip through the Planning Commission last fall. The reclassification had been denied barely. The Planning Commission cited insufficient public notice as their reason. That denial likely saved the Greenbelt from being turned into an industrial site. At the next court hearing, Nadine's attorney tried to argue that she had no knowledge of the mineral lease. The judge wasn't buying it. "You signed the budget approval for the drainage survey," he said, holding up the document. "You initialed the wire transfer. And you were listed as the registered agent on the shell company's filing. You expect the court to believe you didn't know." Nadine's eyes didn't move from the table. Her attorney asked for a recess, but the judge denied it. All 3 board members were hit with new charges: unlawful land transfer, falsification of public documents, and conspiracy to defraud the state. The sentence recommendations jumped accordingly, with minimums now stretching into double-digit years. The Greenbelt was returned to city ownership within days. The city council passed an emergency ordinance designating it a protected urban nature preserve, ensuring it could never be privatized again. As the trial continued, the testimonies grew darker. A former administrative assistant for the HOA came forward under whistleblower protection. She testified that Nadine had ordered her to shred anything that looked too complicated, and that Dale had kept a burner phone specifically for board business, which he referred to as the vault. That burner phone was eventually found hidden behind a ceiling tile in the old HOA office. The data extracted from it included voice memos, encrypted messages, and full audio recordings of internal discussions, some of which included plans to push out low-income residents by restructuring compliance metrics. Their language was clinical.
Cold.
Dale even said in one recording, "We don't need to kick anyone out. We just raise the temperature slowly until they leave on their own." The jury didn't need long to deliberate once closing arguments wrapped. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was swift. Dale and Miriam received 12-year sentences, with no possibility of parole for the first 7. Nadine was handed 15, due to her role in orchestrating the mineral scheme and directing the retaliation campaigns against residents. Her sentence included a lifetime ban from serving on any board or managing any community organization. Restitution was ordered immediately. The state froze all known assets tied to the shell companies and began liquidating them to repay victims. That included the fraudulent fines, the illegal liens, and even relocation expenses for those who'd been forced to move due to harassment or property seizure. The court also awarded punitive damages to the community, something rarely done in cases like this. The funds, overseen by an independent trustee, were earmarked for infrastructure repair, park improvements, and legal aid for any resident still entangled in HOA-related civil suits. With the legal battles over, the neighborhood began rebuilding in earnest. A group of volunteers organized a cleanup of the Greenbelt. I joined them one Saturday morning, clearing brush and painting new trail markers. Someone brought donuts. Someone else brought a Bluetooth speaker. The laughter felt real again. Lena spearheaded a community mentorship program, pairing teens with local tradespeople to learn carpentry, electrical work, and landscaping. Dave started teaching welding out of his garage every other weekend. The kids called it Dave's Forge. Carla, who had stayed long beyond her court-appointed term, finally packed up her office and handed the keys to the new community liaison, a resident-elected position with a rotating term and zero enforcement authority. "Democracy over dictatorship," she said as she passed me the final audit summary. "That's what you all built." A month later, I received an invitation to speak at a regional housing conference. The subject? Reclaiming community from corruption. I stood on a stage in front of city planners, housing advocates, and neighborhood leaders and told them what happened, not just the crimes, but the recovery. I told them about the Greenbelt, about the lemonade stands, about Jeanette, who sent postcards from her new place every other week, about how we didn't just remove the problem. We replaced it with something better. After the talk, a man approached me. He was from a town 2 counties over and said his HOA had started acting strangely: sudden fines, new rules, closed-door meetings. He asked what we had done first. I told him, document everything, talk to your neighbors, and never assume you're alone. As I left the conference center, I couldn't help but think about that first night, the half-warm chili, the silence after the power cut. How something so small had unraveled something so massive. How corruption hides in routine until someone refuses to accept it. The streetlights came on as I pulled into the driveway. Not a flicker. Not a question of whether they'd stay lit. Inside, the microwave hummed to life without hesitation. I reheated some leftover pasta, fed the dog, and stepped out onto the porch with a cold drink and a breeze on my face. The neighborhood was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from fear. The kind that comes from peace.